The therapeutic approach is always positive. Okay. In fact, to be honest with you, we never tell our clients not to have homosexual activity. If they want to do it, let them do it. It's up to them. Our job is to help them understand what they learn from it. When a client comes in and says to me, I had gay sex last night, my only question to him is, what was going on with you just before you decided to act out? What was your psychological state of mind that made you want? That's where the lesson is. So we don't tell clients not to act out. They could act out, but every time they do act out, it's an opportunity to learn something about themselves. The course of treatment is to understand the origins of your homosexuality. If you are homosexual, it's not because you were born this way, but because certain things happened in your childhood. And it's for them to understand what those patterns are. We don't have to tell them. All they need to do is explore their childhood, and they'll see for themselves that there was a hurtful experience with a father or a father figure. Over-involved relationship with the mother. They begin to understand that their homosexual impulse, their desire to have homosexual sex, is preceded by what we call the gray zone. The gray zone is feeling empty, feeling lonely, feeling pathetic, feeling, that's why we say gray zone. You know, it's like a dead zone. And that is preceded by somebody did something to make you feel bad about yourself. Someone shamed you, someone humiliated you, someone said something to make you feel lesser than who you are. And that sets you up for homosexual enactment. And we're teaching people that homosexuality is not about sex. It's about how you feel about yourself as a person. It's about your self-esteem. It's about your self-identity. It's about the way you relate to other people. Whenever I present this model of the cause of homosexuality, many people will say to me, you know, that perfectly fits alcohol, drug, any other kind of addictive behavior is always preceded by feeling bad about yourself. And it does fit into the literature of addictions, of many different kinds of addictions. It's the same pattern, except these clients of ours were traumatized regarding their gender. And that's what makes the homosexual different from all other addictions. That their trauma, their childhood trauma, had to do with their being boys, being masculine. Well, there were earlier claims that we have no scientific evidence for our therapy, but that was years ago. But since then, we've done some of our own publishing, which is, I'm not going to go through the details with you, but I can tell you that today there is much more published scientific evidence for the treatment, the successful treatment of homosexuality, and certainly the Spitzer study, which is a very important study, because Spitzer is not coming from a religious perspective. Spitzer himself was the hero of the gay community because he was the one that helped to change the 1973 decision to normalize homosexuality. And he was the man who afterwards found 200 people who overcame their homosexuality, 150 men and 50 women. And not only did they leave their homosexuality, but they made a positive transition to heterosexuality. And other studies are coming out too. The greatest threat to the gay movement is the testimony of an ex-gay person. When an ex-gay stands up and says, I was once homosexual, but now I am happily married, that is the greatest threat to the gay agenda, because fundamental to the promotion of gay is the idea that you're simply born this way, you have no choice. But when you can show that choice is possible, it totally upsets the foundation of what we understand to be gay. Well, I think that right now in the school system, when a young student goes to the counselor and says, you know, I have these feelings and these attractions, what shall I do? The counselor says, oh, you were born gay. You have a gay gene. That's all there is to it. There's no scientific support for this, but this is the popular misinformation we're giving young people. So these kids have no hope for change. What we are hoping can happen is that the counselor can say, look, you can either accept your homosexuality or you can try to change. change is possible. People have overcome their homosexuality, and you might want to consider the possibility of overcoming your homosexuality. That is a fair way of treating these young people who are looking for information. They're not being told that they have a choice. Well, one of the pieces of advice is go out and experiment and find out what you like. Well, this is ridiculous. I mean, what kind of a choice is this? First of all, if the young person has these feelings, he's going to engage in homosexual activity. He's going to like it because sex feels good, and that's going to only deepen his identity as gay. It's going to deepen his conviction that this must be who I really am, because sex always feels good. And that's going to limit his possibility of considering change in the future. I can tell you that one of the factors in predicting treatment success is the amount of sexual activity, the amount of sexual experiences. The client who has had less homosexual experiences does better in therapy, because you don't have to worry about that addictive dimension that we talked about. And the one who has had a lot of sexual experiences, it's going to be more difficult for him because his body is ready to kick into that. Here at this clinic, we can claim a third, a third, a third. And by the way, this fits most of the research on the treatment of homosexuality. It's about a third, a third, a third. A third, no change. A third, significant improvement. A third, cure. Now, let me explain. When I say a third cure, I do not mean that this person will never have a homosexual thought or feeling again. If it does come up, he will understand what it's about. He will go to himself and say, okay, what's going on with me right now that I should be feeling these attractions? How am I doing with my friendships? How am I doing with my wife? How am I doing with myself? So his mind goes there. See, homosexual temptation is a signal to go back to yourself and check in with yourself. When we say no change, we're talking about that 1/3 of people who were forced to come to us. They did not want to be in therapy. Their parents dragged them into therapy, or their wives dragged them. They were not motivated. But usually when people are motivated, they will experience significant change in understanding and diminishing their homosexuality. My oldest client is 64, and my youngest is 7 years old. So I'm going from 7 years old because he is showing what we call GID, gender identity disorder. He wants to be a girl, so we're working with a family. And the oldest is a 64-year-old man who had no idea that he had a choice. He had no idea that change was possible. And he is doing really very well, actually, because luckily he did not have that many experiences. He did have some, but he didn't have too many homosexual experiences. And he's also very motivated.